What we have here is a black and white build that has a pretty interesting setup process and a modular design with multiple layout options. Now, while I wouldn't necessarily call this a small case, considering the components it can fit, it is relatively compact. Now, later on, we'll talk about this video sponsor Squarespace, but for now, let's take a look at the parts I chose for this build, see what it's like to put it all together, and then we can check out the thermal and gaming performance. For the CPU, I'll be using the i5-13600K. This is a previous generation chip, but I've honestly not found any good reason to upgrade my 13600 with a 14th gen version yet. You're still getting nearly identical gaming performance for less money. There are some other options to consider with a high-end build like this. There is the 7800X3D, which is more power efficient, and it's gonna get you the most frames. Or if you're wanting a build more centered around productivity tasks, looking at an i7 or i9 might make more sense for you. Still, as far as Intel chips go, I think the 13600 is the one that makes the most sense for gaming right now. As for the motherboard, I'll be using the N7 Z790 from NZXT. Now, I do think this is one of the cleanest looking boards available. Very little in the way of branding or loud colors, just an all matte black aesthetic that I really appreciate. Now, beyond the looks, you have ample IO with a clear CMOS button if you should need it. Now, on the front is 6 fan headers, which I will be taking advantage of in this build, along with plenty of USB headers. You also have a USB-C header and then a 3.0 header on the side next to some SATA ports. Now, under the magnetic covers is room for 3 M.2 slots. I'll be plugging in a single 1TB 970 EVO for now in the primary slot. This is a Gen 3 drive, which is fast enough for gaming, but if you want faster read-write speeds, then you should definitely take a look at a Gen 4 drive instead. The CPU cooler I'm gonna be using does overhang the DIMM slots and give about 42 millimeters of clearance, so I'm gonna use a couple of low-profile sticks from Corsair. This set stands about 35 millimeters in height, so we shouldn't have an issue installing the cooler later on. And because we're only using 2 sticks with 4 available slots, I'm gonna be populating the second and the fourth positions. That way we get dual channel support. Okay, with the motherboard prepped, I'm gonna start assembling the case. Now, what we have here is the Cube 500. The whole idea here, the thing that makes this one different from most other cases, is the modular design. And Cooler Master does give you quite a few different options here. So of course, you've got your standard layout, which puts your motherboard upright and the GPU at the bottom. You can then flip it around to prioritize GPU cooling, along with laying it on its side, or even just stripping off all of the panels and using it as a test bench. Which actually, I know that's probably not something that many people would do, but I've been in need of a test bench, so I actually might use it that way myself. Now, honestly though, whenever I started taking everything out of the box, I was kind of trying to figure out who this is for. Now, I don't fully understand why anybody would want the extra work to have to build their case. Now, in the ITX space, we're pretty familiar with the idea of a flat-packed PC case. Some of the most popular and loved cases come that way. And even though they can be a little bit involved to put together, they can still have a lot of benefits. You know, working in such a small case, having the ability to remove every piece to make any connections or do whatever you need is beneficial. But why would anybody want to do that extra work in a larger case if you don't have to? Especially when there are very similar alternatives like the Q500L that you can just open up and kind of just get going on without the extra steps. I will say though, after working with this case for the past week, I've kind of come around to the whole idea of it. You see, the nice thing about this is that even though it might seem more complicated to build up front, which, you know, it is, there is more work, it actually does sometimes make parts of the build a little bit easier. Now, I'm not going to go into a detailed step-by-step on how to put this case together. The included manual is actually kind of confusing, but Cooler Master does have an easier to follow video tutorial on YouTube that covers all of that. The whole idea here is that you add your components as you build the case. The kind of main piece here being that motherboard tray that anchors all of the other pieces together. Once I started to understand that build process, that's where I started to kind of turn around on my thoughts for this case. The whole assembly is very well thought out. Throughout the majority of the build, you don't have to pick that main motherboard tray off the table because everything kind of clips into it. The power supply unit hooks into the side, then it's easily secured. I'm using a Cooler Master GX3 850 here, and then I threw on a black vinyl sticker because of course that ugly side of the power supply is the one that's going to be facing out. Then the back and front panels can just kind of slide into place, and then those are easily secured as well with clearly marked holes. Every piece is pretty easy to understand and it's very straightforward to install. This even goes to the screws that are provided. You get this little bag of screws, which at first just looks like a bunch of work, but then you realize that they're all the same size. The same size screws are used for the power supply bracket, the side panels, to secure the motherboard, to secure the GPU, basically everything. And That might not sound like a big deal at first, but every other flat pack case that I've put together, there are usually many variations of size, type, and length of screws included that it can become really confusing and pretty easy to mess up. The materials here are also very sturdy. It's a very thick steel, thicker I think than most cases that I've worked with, so it feels really rigid and high quality. The white finish on mine also looks great. The version I have here comes with a couple of different side panel options. They are all very pastel color, which they're very well done, but not really my style. I actually decided to strip the paint off of one of the sets to paint it black to complete that whole, white and black look that I was going for. And after the initial paint was removed, the panel kind of looks sick with this unfinished steel. I might actually polish it up and put on like a black case instead. It does have a very utilitarian look that I like. So now I want to take a minute to talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes building a website simple. You start off by choosing from one of their hundreds of available templates, then they give you all the tools you need to customize it to fit your brand and needs. You can add a video library, a blog, portfolio gallery, or even a custom online store to sell any of your digital or physical goods, which is conveniently controlled right on the Squarespace website that also includes an analytics section to keep track of your website stats and orders. You can also set up an online calendar for customers to easily book an appointment with you, or use the marketing section to create email campaigns. Even if you only need a simple portfolio, Squarespace is the ideal platform to use. Whenever you're ready to get started, you can sign up for a completely free trial using the link squarespace.com/Devyn Johnston. And if you use the code Devyn Johnston at checkout, you can save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Now for the CPU cooler, I'm gonna be using the Cooler Master MA824 Stealth. This is a pretty beefy CPU cooler with a dual tower fin design and 2 fans. It's got a 130mm in the middle and then another 120 attached to the side. The whole piece reaches just over 165mm in height, and we have 172 to work with in the case. Now, I really like the setup process of this cooler. It's slightly less involved than most air coolers. You still have to install your LGA backplate and mounting brackets. Then we have some thermal paste that's pre-applied, and once the 2 screws are lined up with a mounting bracket, you have 2 screws on the very top of the cooler to secure it. So you actually don't have to fiddle with taking out the middle fan where those little clips get, caught up on the fins, and it's all kind of annoying. It's also able to handle the 13600K with no complaints, settling in the low 70s playing Cyberpunk 2077 at ultra settings with an ultra wide 1440p resolution, pulling over 120 watts. It's definitely getting assisted with some extra airflow. I installed 2 140mm Noctua fans at the bottom, and then I have a 120 at the top and another at the rear to exhaust the heat. The front and top positions could also support 140s if you have them. Then the case also includes a side fan bracket if you wanted to switch out that tempered glass side panel with a vented one and then run some on the side. And as a side note, it is too bad that they didn't include 2 vented panels. If you wanted the extra airflow for your components, then you need to use the glass panel on the back side where you have to look at all of your cables. So I hope you did a good job managing them. For the GPU, we'll be using the Founders Edition 4080. This card is 310mm in length, which will fit in here without any problems as we do have up to 360mm of clearance here. GPU temps are also looking good as well, staying under 60 degrees Celsius, which is definitely the result of those 2 extra 140mm fans at the bottom, giving that 4080 plenty of extra airflow. This 33 liters in size is around what you see in many micro ATX cases, and seeing it on my desk, I actually had to remind myself several times that this is an ATX case. It can comfortably fit an ATX board with really no compromises. Overall, I think I like the case. I think Cooler Master managed to pull off exactly what they were going for here. The build process is really well thought out, and the case itself feels incredibly rigid and well made, but the overall look is just not for me. I think what gets me is that I feel like the design language is inconsistent. The circle cutouts for the pegboard front and top panels, combined with the sharp angles of the edges and all of the other case cutouts, just don't match. It feels a bit chaotic. But anyway, let me know what you think. Would you go for a case like this? So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.